Hello, I'm Michael Bunch. I'm the plant pathologist at the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. In this presentation, I'll be discussing the relative performance of different fungicides for the management of white mold in soybeans with a focus on the fungicide MIRAVIS Neo. I'd like to stress that this is an abbreviated summary of comparative fungicide efficacy. I would strongly recommend that you reference the companion PDF document showing detailed results from individual field studies. Referencing that document will allow you to see the consistency of the response to an individual fungicide across studies. In this presentation, I'll only be showing average results across multiple field studies. This testing was conducted by calibrating fungicide droplet size relative to soybean canopy closure. I would strongly recommend that you review our droplet size testing results for white mold management in soybeans before you go out and spray. What we have found is that you can dramatically improve fungicide performance against white mold by getting your droplet size right, and that fine droplets are only optimal if the canopy is wide open. As that canopy gets denser, you need medium, coarse, or depending on the nozzle manufacturer, even very coarse droplets to optimize fungicide performance against white mold. Fine droplets simply do not have the velocity to penetrate a dense canopy. We've seen dramatic improvements in the performance of all fungicides against white mold by calibrating droplet size relative to canopy closure, but actually we've seen the biggest gains in those fungicides that have intermediate efficacy against white mold. So when you calibrate fungicide droplet size relative to canopy closure, you improve the fungicide performance for every product. But the difference between the best performing products and those products of intermediate performance will narrow somewhat when you get your droplet size right. These studies were conducted on soybeans seeded to narrow rows, 14-inch row spacing. Seeding rate was 140,000 or 165,000 viable seeds an acre. Spray volume was 15 gallons an acre. Every individual study was conducted with 6 experimental replicates, i.e. the treatments were randomized 6 times. White mold was assessed at soybean maturity by evaluating every plant individually in 1 or 2 rows per plot for white mold severity on that plant. That's every plant for the full length of the plot in 1 or 2 rows per plot. Fungicides were applied when conditions favored white mold at either 100% R2 or as soon as the canopy closed, whichever occurred first. When conditions did not favor white mold as we were entering bloom, we applied at R3. When we made a second application, that application was made 7 or 4 to 14 days later, depending on the study. Supplemental irrigation was applied to facilitate white mold pressure, because you can only learn how a fungicide performs against white mold if you get white mold. Moving into results, I'd first like to discuss the results from those studies in which we made 2 sequential fungicide applications targeting white mold. Here's MIRAVIS Neo versus various competitor products. What you can see right away is that MIRAVIS Neo definitely showed efficacy against white mold when applied at the low rate of 13.7 fluid ounces. However, it was not as effective as Delero Complete at 8 fluid ounces or Endura at 6 ounces. It was a bit more effective than Revitec applied at 8 fluid ounces. So the results I just showed were the results across 3 studies in which we compared MIRAVIS Neo at 13.7 fluid ounces versus competitor standards. From 2019 to 2024, in these fungicide efficacy studies in which we calibrated fungicide droplet size relative to canopy closure, we evaluated that low rate of MIRAVIS Neo 4 times. And here is the combined analysis across all 4 of those studies in terms of the fungicide performance relative to the non-treated. What you can see is that that low rate of MIRAVIS Neo applied twice gave us an average of about 20 to 25% reduction in white mold. When we applied MIRAVIS Neo at the high application rate of 20.8 fluid ounces, we saw fairly similar levels of disease control. Slightly better disease control, but not dramatically better. So what about MIRAVIS Neo applied just once, rather than twice sequentially? The only comparison we have to a competitor product, in terms of enough studies that we can do a combined analysis, was MIRAVIS Neo versus Revitec. And what you can see here is that with a single application of MIRAVIS Neo, we got better disease control with that low rate of MIRAVIS Neo than Revitec in terms of white mold management. Okay, this is very similar to what we saw with the 2 sequential applications a few slides ago. Now, looking at all the studies in which we evaluated MIRAVIS Neo as a single application, what you can see is that that single application MIRAVIS Neo reduced white mold by about 20% versus the non-treated. Summarizing what we have learned so far, MIRAVIS Neo clearly shows efficacy against white mold in soybeans. However, it is not as effective as some of our competitive standards for white mold in soybeans. In the testing that we have conducted, evaluating MIRAVIS Neo versus competitor standards, Delero Complete at 8 fluid ounces and Endura at 6 ounces performed better than MIRAVIS Neo at 13.7 fluid ounces. MIRAVIS Neo did perform better than Revitec at 8 fluid ounces. But remember, Revitec is not marketed as a white mold fungicide. It has some degree of activity against white mold, but is primarily marketed for the management of other foliar diseases in soybeans. Before we close, I'd like to give very sincere thanks to my staff, Aaron Faust, Swan Collis, Jesse Hafner, and Gabby Henson, and our student workers. It's the dedicated work of these people that make this work possible. I'd also like to thank the companies, the pesticide registrants, who funded this research and made it possible to make these comparisons. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention.